I'm sorry, we'll have to cross now to the House of Commons, where the Home Secretary is announcing the chair of the Grooming Gangs Inquiry. Let's listen in.
Predators, they then found themselves belittled and even blamed when it was justice they were owed. In January, my predecessor asked Baroness Casey of Blackstock, who's here with us today, to conduct a national audit on group-based child sexual exploitation and abuse. With devastating clarity, Baroness Casey revealed the horror that lies behind that jargonistic term. It is vital that we too call these crimes what they were: multiple sexual assaults committed by multiple men on multiple occasions. Children were submitted to beatings and gang rapes. Many contracted sexually transmitted infections. Some were forced to have abortions. Others had their children taken from them. But it was not just these awful crimes that now shame us. There was also an abject failure by the state in its many forms to fulfil its most basic duty: protecting the young and vulnerable. Worse still, some in positions of power turned a blind eye to the horror, even covered it up. Despite a shameful lack of national data, Baroness Casey was clear that in some local areas where data was available, and I quote, disproportionate numbers of men from Asian ethnic backgrounds were amongst the suspects. Like every member of my community who I know, I am horrified by these acts. We must root out this evil once and for all. The sickening acts of a minority of evil men, as well as those in positions of authority who look the other way, must not be allowed to marginalise or demonise entire communities of law-abiding citizens. What is required now is a moment of reckoning. We must cast fresh light on this darkness. In her audit, Baroness Casey called for a national inquiry. In June, the government accepted that recommendation. And today, I can announce the chair and panel that will form the leadership of the inquiry and a draft of the inquiry's terms of reference. The inquiry will be chaired by Baroness Anne Longfield. As many in this place will know, Baroness Longfield was the Children's Commissioner from 2015 to 2021. She has devoted her life to children's rights, including running a charity supporting and protecting young people and working for Prime Ministers of different political parties. In recognition of her service, Baroness Longfield was elevated to the Lords earlier this year. At that point, she took the Labour whip, which on taking up this appointment, she will now resign. Alongside her, I can also announce her two fellow panellists. The first is Zoe Billingham, CBE. Zoe is a former inspector at His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and currently serves as chair of Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust. She brings deep expertise in safeguarding and policing, specifically in holding forces to account. The second panellist is Eleanor Kelly, CBE. Eleanor is the former Chief Executive of Southwark Council. In 2017, she supported the survivors of the London Bridge terrorist attacks and the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire of the same year. Together, the chair and panel bring deep experience of championing children's rights, knowledge of policing and local government, and crucially, a proven track record of holding powerful institutions to account. Each individual was recommended by Baroness Casey, and her recommendation follows recent engagement with victims. The first thing the chair and panel will do, alongside Baroness Casey, is meet with victims later this week. Today, we also published the draft terms of reference, which I will place in the Library of the House. Baroness Casey was clear this inquiry must be time limited to ensure that justice is swift for those who have already waited too long. For that reason, it will be completed within 3 years, supported by a £65 million budget. The inquiry will be a series of local investigations overseen by a national panel with full statutory powers. Baroness Longfield has confirmed that Oldham will have a local investigation. The chair and panel will determine the other locations in due course, and no area will be able to resist a local investigation. These terms of reference are clear on a number of vital issues. The inquiry is focused specifically on child sexual abuse committed by grooming gangs. It will consider explicitly the background of offenders, including their ethnicity and religion, and whether the authorities failed to properly investigate what happened out of a misplaced desire to protect community cohesion. The inquiry will act without fear or favour, identifying individual, institutional and systemic failure, inadequate organisational responses and failures of leadership. It will also work hand in hand with the police. Where new criminality comes to light, be that by the perpetrators or those who covered up their crimes, the inquiry will pass evidence to law enforcement so they can take forward any further prosecutions and put more of these evil men behind bars. The inquiry must and will place victims and survivors at the forefront, with a charter setting out how they will participate and how their views, experiences and testimony will shape the inquiry's work. As I have said already, the terms are in draft form. The Chair will now consult on them with victims and other stakeholders, and they will be confirmed no later than March, when the inquiry can begin its work in earnest. Alongside launching this inquiry, Baroness Casey's audit contained a number of other recommendations which the government accepted in full. As the inquiry begins its work, we continue righting these wrongs. I can announce today that I have commissioned new research from UK Research and Innovation to rectify the unacceptable gaps in our understanding of perpetrators' backgrounds and motivations, including their ethnicity and religion. My predecessor wrote to all police forces calling on them to improve the collection of ethnicity data. And while the Home Secretary does not currently have the power to mandate that this is collected, I will rectify this by legislating at the earliest possible opportunity. The Department for Education is currently interrogating gaps in children in need data identified in the audit, which seems to underreport the scale of this crisis. My right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, will soon publish the findings of an urgent review of this data conducted by her department. Across government, the audit identified that poor data sharing continues to put children at risk. As a result, we are introducing a legal duty for information sharing between safeguarding partners. We are creating a unique identifier for each child, linking all data across government. And we are upgrading police technology to ensure data can be shared across agencies. The audit also identified an absurdity in our legal system that saw some child rapists convicted of lesser crimes. As a result, we are now changing the law to make clear that children cannot consent when they have been raped by an adult, and so perpetrators are charged for the hideous crime they have in fact committed. While the law has protected abusers from the consequences of their crimes, it has too often punished victims. Some survivors were convicted for crimes they had been coerced into, continuing their trauma to this day. We are already legislating in the Crime and Policing Bill to disregard offences related to prostitution. And the Minister of Justice is now working with the Criminal Cases Review Commission to ensure that they are resourced to review applications from individuals who believe that they were wrongly criminalised. The national audit identified further weaknesses in relation to taxi licensing. Abusers were applying for licences in areas where controls were lax to circumvent protection put in place by local councils to tackle abuse. My right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, will soon be legislating to close this dangerous loophole in the regulation of taxis. The audit was clear that justice has not been done. Baroness Casey requested that a new national police investigation was required to bring offenders to justice. Last month, the National Crime Agency launched Operation Beaconport, reviewing previously closed cases of child sexual exploitation. It has already flagged more than 1,200 cases for potential reinvestigation, more than 200 of which are high-priority cases of rape. The evil men who committed these crimes and thought they got away with it will find they have nowhere to hide. The audit finally called on the government to fund the delivery of its recommendations. Alongside investment in the inquiry itself, I can announce today that a further £3.65 million will be committed this year to the policing operation, survivor support and research into grooming gangs. This work, Madam Deputy Speaker, is essential. But without truth, there can be no justice. Today, I have announced the chair and panel of an inquiry which will shine a bright light on this dark moment in our history. They will do so alongside the victims of these awful crimes, who have waited too long to see justice done. This inquiry is theirs, not ours. So I call on all those present to put politics aside for a moment and to support this chair and her panel in the pursuit of truth and justice. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let us remember victims are at the heart of this. Young girls, some only 10 years old, were groomed and gang raped by men of mainly Pakistani origin. Girls like Jane, just 12 years old when she was raped by an illegal immigrant. When she was found by police, instead of arresting the rapist, they arrested Jane. Or Anna, only 15 years old, who repeatedly told social workers that she had been gang raped, but instead of helping her, they allowed her to marry her main abuser in an Islamic ceremony, attended by the very social worker who should have protected her. Last week, sentencing remarks were published from several of these terrible cases. I warn the House, some of these are extremely graphic. One perpetrator, Mohammed Karar, raped a 12-year-old girl, and when she tried to fight back, he hit her with a baseball bat and then inserted the handle into her vagina. He also injected her with heroin and forced her to take crack cocaine. Another man, Arshid Hussain, viciously beat a young girl, stubbed out a cigarette on her chest, tied her up, and she was then repeatedly raped by numerous different Asian men. The same man, Arshid Hussain, also called a victim who had been raped and abused since the age of just 7, quotes, white trash. He said that Asian girls would not do what he was forcing her to do. There was an explicit racial element to his crime. He was raping his victim because she was white. The identity of the majority of the perpetrators is something that should not be hidden. A 2020 study by academics at the universities of Southampton and Reading reviewed 498 grooming gang convictions. They found that 83% of the perpetrators were of Muslim background, mainly, specifically, of Pakistani heritage. The Casey report and the Telford report made similar observations. The fact is, these crimes were deliberately covered up by those in authority who were more interested in so-called community relations and in avoiding being called racist than they were in protecting young girls. I spoke to a retired police officer who was told by a serving chief superintendent to stop investigating abuse by Pakistani origin taxi drivers in Bradford because the local police did not want to offend Bradford's Muslim community. And I've sent the name of that officer to the police for investigation. A former Labour MP, Simon Danchuk, was even told by the then chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party to stop asking questions to avoid antagonising the Muslim community in his town. Yet when the need for a national inquiry into this was raised in January, the Prime Minister disgracefully smeared those calling for an inquiry as, quotes, far right. What the Prime Minister claimed was a far right bandwagon in January had become government policy by June. So will the Home Secretary please apologise on behalf of the Prime Minister for what he said last January? The truth is, this should not have taken several months and the threat of a vote in Parliament to agree to this inquiry in the first place, and it should not have taken another 6 months to appoint a chair. That is what the survivors and their families told me yesterday. One of the most disturbing elements of this scandal is the deliberate cover-up of these crimes, as I have said. So can the Home Secretary assure the House that those in authority who covered up these crimes will be prosecuted for the offence of misconduct in public office? And will she ensure the inquiry refers such cases to the police for investigation? Can she confirm the inquiry will formally start in March of 2026 and that the final report will be published publicly 3 years later in March 2029? We have not yet seen the terms of reference. Survivors and their families, who I met yesterday, are concerned the scope of this inquiry may be too broad. So will the Home Secretary confirm it will focus specifically on localised, group-based grooming gangs, and that it will analyse the ethnicity and religious background of the perpetrators? She mentions local inquiries sitting underneath the national inquiry. Can she also specifically confirm that those local inquiries will be completely independent of those bodies they are investigating, particularly independent of local councils and independent of local police forces? They can't be allowed to investigate themselves. Will the Home Secretary also confirm that parents of survivors and victims will be able to serve on the panel as well? I spoke yesterday to 2 parents of survivors who felt they'd been excluded from the previous panels. Madam Deputy Speaker, for many survivors and victims, the truth has been hidden for far too long. These crimes were covered up because those in authority were more concerned about so-called community relations and avoiding being called racist than they were about protecting young children. That was an abject moral failure. The truth, at last, must come out.
Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for his remarks. Let me just say, as he was reading out excerpts from some of the court transcripts that have been made public, I, like other members in the House, have read some of those transcripts, and they do make for truly horrifying reading, and they are a reminder, the starkest reminder of all perhaps, for everyone in this House and beyond, that it is absolutely essential that we all collectively do right by the victims who have had such unimaginable horrors inflicted upon them, and I hope that that is the spirit in which we will all be able to engage across this House as the inquiry gets up and running and continues its work. I also want to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think this is a moment to elevate, now that we have a chair and panel in place, to elevate this discussion beyond our usual trade-offs of party politics across this dispatch box. The Shadow Secretary of State has a critique of the government. I will robustly defend the government of which I am a part. We have always been focused on the outcome of justice and truth for victims, less so the process itself, but it was this government that asked Baroness Casey to do her national audit. She followed the evidence and recommended this national inquiry, and that is what we are doing, and that is what we have supported. But now that we have a chair and a panel, I just think that this is a moment, if we're going to do right by the victims, who are a diverse cohort of people who will have different views and who will all feel, regardless of where they stand on this inquiry itself, some degree of anxiety about what will happen next, and will need some reassurance that we can rise above our usual political discourse and unite in support for the chair and panel as they do this important work. Let me say, for most of his detailed questions, the answer is a straightforward yes. So on scope, let me just reassure him there is no dilution of the scope, and it is very clearly focused on exactly the problem that was named by Baroness Casey in her national audit. To the extent that the inquiry finds evidence of any potential misconduct in public office or other breaches of the law, of course, they are working very closely with our partners in law enforcement. The whole point for having this inquiry is to make sure that there are actions that result from these investigations and that people are properly held to account, including by facing the full force of the law. I'm sure that once the inquiry reports, they will have other things to say, potentially even about strengthening the law as well. So I think it's important we let the inquiry do their work, but they are not going to be held back from making any findings that lead to further investigations and accountability through the legal system. Let me also confirm to him on timings. March, the draft terms of reference will be confirmed no later than March. It could come a little earlier potentially, but up to three months for the draft terms of reference, and then up to 3 years for the inquiry to conclude. So no later than 2020, not March 29, with the report report as well. And that is a timetable that the chair and the panel members have signed up for. On the local investigations, of course, it's right, they won't be investigating themselves. The work of the local investigation will be under the auspices of the chair and her panel, and they will be making sure that those investigations are held by them to the standard that they will set and follow themselves, and they will also decide which other areas they wish to be included in these local investigations, and I'm sure members will want to make representations to them, but no area anywhere in England or Wales will be able to resist having a local investigation under the auspices of this inquiry, which of course has all of the statutory powers that you would expect such an inquiry to have. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've dealt with all of the issues that the Shadow Secretary of State has raised, but I do look forward to, I hope, a more constructive dialogue between us as the inquiry gets underway.
Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Wow, significant update there from the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood, announcing and confirming that Baroness Anne Longfield will be the chair of the grooming gangs inquiry, and that there will be two expert panellists supporting Zoe Billingham, CBE, and Eleanor Kelly. Let's cross now to our political editor, Christopher Hope, who has been watching on in the House of Commons. Christopher Hope, a wide-ranging update there from the Home Secretary, long overdue, 6 months since this inquiry was announced. What do you make of it?
Well, it starts formally in March. We'll see the draft terms and conditions shortly. They're published in the House of Commons Library today. We'll try and get them for viewers as soon as we can. And then this goes for 3 years. It costs £65 million just the inquiry. So for me, the politics of this, and it's vital this is done properly, it will report on the eve of the next general election, which can be held as late as summer 2029. This could become an election issue, certainly if it's delayed past the election. That'll be controversial. So as things stand, though, you heard there from Shabana Mahmood, she is determined to get to the bottom of this. She said she announced those three individuals running it. We saw Baroness Longfield. We can discuss her in a minute, Charlie, but she was someone who did fight for children. She was very into driving the agenda for children against Whitehall. She did that when she was the Children's Commissioner under the Tory government. Also supporting Zoe Billingham, who's the chair of Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Trust, but crucially, she ran HM Inspector Constabulary, so used to holding police to account. That's vital. Eleanor Kelly is the other person helping there. She, of course, CEO of Southwark Council, but worked closely with victims, both of the Grenfell attacks and those London Bridge attacks. So she can get on the side of victims and help understand why victims can so quickly fall out with what a government's trying to do. We saw that in the past few months, how the victims have lost faith and lost trust in the government for some of the ways they're trying to go ahead with this. It must be victims focused. We heard there from Shabana Mahmood, she will be meeting, or rather the chair will be meeting with victims this week, and it's very important how those meetings go. Will those victims feel listened to? Will those victims feel on side? It's complicated how it's going to work, Charlie. You may know more than this. There'll be an overarching panel and then local inquiries, but will those local inquiries be forced on local areas to hold them by the panel, or must they agree first to hold a local inquiry?
Well, the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, said that no area will be able to resist the national panel's call for a local investigation in specific areas. And we broke the news before Shabana Mahmood spoke that Oldham's local inquiry, now cancelled, that's going to be replaced by one of these local investigations being chaired by this new grooming gangs national inquiry. So there'll be an oversight level, it seems, Chris, which has the powers to compel all the evidence and witnesses, etc. And they will then send in investigators into local areas.
So those powers, the powers to compel at the national level, they'll be conferred to the local level, who will be a proxy for Baroness Longfield at the local level.
That's right, and I think Oldham is the only area confirmed now, so their local inquiry cancelled. The barrister Tom Crowther no longer involved in the process the government announced in January. That is the only area that's confirmed so far. But Chris, obviously there's been lots of pressure on other areas, including Bradford. Perhaps they will be one of the local areas that will be up and running by March, which Shabana Mahmood announced today.
That's right. We also heard other areas of government being pulled together by Shabana Mahmood, notably on detail of information, how information is collected by UK research and investment. UK research certainly on the background and ethnicity of and ethnicity data, so we know a fuller picture here of who is committing these crimes. The DFE, the Department of Education, it also will look at its data under Bridget Phillips and publish a report on whether some of these areas are being overlooked. There'll be, in future, children cannot consent to be raped by an adult. By that I mean they cannot consent to sexual activity. That is vital. And also finally, on the Department for Transport, the regulation of taxis to stop perpetrators getting around it.